Jin moved through the crowd that had gathered in an opening around the trenches. Actors, jugglers, dancers and musicians mingled with the soldiers. It had been 2 months since Lord Hideyoshi had brought entertainers for his men. This wasn't a siege, Jin thought, this was a carnival. Suddenly, a hand grabbed his shoulder. "Sake! Bring me sake, you fool!" Jin shrugged off the drunk man and continued on his path. "Oi, Jin, are you going to see her again? You fool! How much money has she taken from you so far?" He paid no attention and continued walking, pausing to look towards the top of the Ishigakiyama hill, where the Kampaku's impressive one-night castle stood. No doubt Lord Hideyoshi was hosting the other lords in one of his refined tea ceremonies, Jin thought. He then turned his gaze towards Odawara. The castle was lit by bonfires, but there was no joyous music coming from that direction. How long will they hold out while we party, he wondered, and continued walking. Welcome to our final episode on the life and times of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and the midpoint of our series on the Sengoku Jidai. In this episode, the second unifier of Japan will contend against the powerful Hojo clan in his final hurdle towards unifying the land of the rising sun under his banner. Do you know why people on YouTube and Patreon support us financially? 2 new exclusive videos weekly and other perks, including early access to all videos, voting rights on the next videos and series, access to our private Discord and our schedule, and much more. More than 200 exclusive videos are available to our patrons and YouTube members, including the series on the Spanish War of Succession, Punic Wars, Pacific War, Iberian Reconquista, Russian Revolution and Civil War, North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, and much more. Join them via the links in the description or pinned comment, or by pressing the join button under the video. Most importantly, their kind support allows us to create 3 free videos per week without worrying and pay our team members competitive salaries. Thanks for supporting us. In the previous episode, we saw how Hideyoshi tied up the loose ends from the campaign of Kamaki and Nagakute and followed his invasions of Shikoku and Kyushu. Having brought the powerful Shimazu clan to heel, the Kampaku now turned his gaze towards the other direction, the Kanto Plain and northeast Honshu. There, beyond Ieyasu's domain, lay the lands of the Hojo clan and the Date clan, the last powerful families whose allegiance was still on the fence. The Hojo in particular controlled the largest part of the fertile Kanto region, and ranked amongst the wealthiest families in Japan. If they wished, they could pose a significant threat to Toyotomi's regime. Their seat at Odawara Castle was a naturally fortified position, with the sea on one side and Mount Hakone and Lake Ashi on the other. The fortress was accessible only from 2 approaches, the coastal Tokaido Road and the mountainous Nakasendo, both of which were guarded by other Hojo castles. Naturally, the Hojo had reinforced Odawara's defenses with man-made fortifications. Moats, ditches and strong walls complemented the banks and cliffs that surrounded the castle, making Odawara one of the strongest bastions in the land. Despite their own defensive strength, the Odawara Hojo had familial ties to the Tokugawa, as Ieyasu's daughter had married Hojo Ujinao, the son and heir of the clan head Hojo Ujimasa. Ieyasu on his own had provided a significant, if not insurmountable, challenge for Hideyoshi a few years before. If these 2 clans united against him this time, and perhaps attracted others like the Date, the Toyotomi could find themselves severely outnumbered and outgunned. At first, Hideyoshi tried to solve the Hojo issue through diplomacy. Twice, in 1588 and 1589, he sent envoys to Hojo Ujimasa, requesting the daimyo and his son to visit him in his villa in the capital and pay his respects, essentially submitting to Hideyoshi's hegemony. Ujimasa refused to do so, lulled into a false sense of security by his strong defenses and his ties to Ieyasu, and citing his poor health as an excuse. Luckily for the Hojo, Tokugawa Ieyasu intervened. Ieyasu suggested that Ujimasa's brother Ujinori make the trip. He also made it very clear that in the case Hojo refused to play ball, he would terminate their marriage alliance. Ujinori did indeed travel to Kyoto and visited Hideyoshi in his residence, the Jurokudai, a move that for the time being normalized the relations between the 2 clans. In 1589, Ujimasa promised to visit Hideyoshi in December on the excuse of settling a territorial dispute of the Numata area in northern Kanto. Hideyoshi wasn't keen to go to war with the Hojo, so he appeased Ujimasa by awarding him 2/3 of Numata and the anonymous castle, the Numata-jo, which previously belonged to the Sanada clan. However, Ujimasa probably had no intention of ever visiting, as he retracted his promise, sending another letter to Hideyoshi asking to reschedule the visit for the spring or summer of the following year, a move that angered the Kampaku. The last straw came during the last months of 1589, when Kuninori Inamata, who had been given the lordship of Numata-jo by the Hojo, attacked and seized Nagurumi-jo from the Sanada. Normally, the capture of a single castle would not have caused havoc, but Inamata's attack flew in the face of Hideyoshi's order that no lord go to war with another without the Kampaku's explicit consent. Despite pledges from Ujinao that Inamata had acted on his own, and that the castle had been returned to the Sanada, Hideyoshi had made up his mind. He had grown tired of the defiant Hojo, and decided that strength of arms would settle this once and for all. Having mustered all of his forces and those of his subordinate daimyo, Hideyoshi made his move against the Hojo in the early months of 1590. Maeda Toshie and Uesugi Kageketsu would link up with the Sanada forces and take the northern and mountainous Nakasendo Road. Meanwhile, Hideyoshi's main force moved along the coastal Tokaido Road, led by Tokugawa Ieyasu. Finally, Chosakabe Motochika sailed to the port of Shimizu at the head of a substantially large navy. Toshie and Kageketsu, with their 35,000 troops, laid siege to Hachigata Castle and its 3,000-strong garrison. After almost a month, the lord of Hachigata, Hojo Ujikuni, surrendered after securing assurances that the lives of his men would be spared. The same fate fell upon Hojo Ujiteru's Hachioji Castle, which they took through a costly frontal assault, overwhelming the 1,300-men-strong garrison with their own 15,000 attackers. In Musashi, another of Odawara's outlying castles, Oshi, came under siege by Hideyoshi's trusted minister, Ishida Mitsunari. The swamps and marshes, which stretched out as long as the castle's fortifications, hindered any direct assaults upon the walls, so Mitsunari copied his master's favorite tactic by constructing ditches to flood the castle. However, the defenders did not give up, and the castle would only surrender after the commander received word of Odawara's fall. Elsewhere, the Hojo castles fell one after the other. Then, in late spring, it was Odawara's turn. It was here that one of the most unusual sieges in Japanese history took place. As we have already stated, Odawara was a castle among castles. Its strong walls and numerous towers, bridges and courtyards guaranteed that the Hojo fortress was impervious to any frontal assault. Seeing that any attempt to take the castle by force would result in a bloodbath, Hideyoshi settled for a prolonged blockade to starve the garrison out. Just as he had done in Kamaki, he created his own fortifications, a series of trenches and palisades, and set up his own headquarters at Ishigaki-yama. Originally, Ujimasa wanted to sally out and meet the Toyotomi forces on the field. However, he was convinced to remain within the castle walls by one of his retainers, Matsuda Norihide, who had been secretly bribed by Hideyoshi. Since Odawara had a large stockpile of provisions, Ujimasa was content to stay idle. His soldiers were also highly spirited, since they were well fed and entertained. However, their music performances and games were nothing compared to what was happening on the other side of the walls. There, Hideyoshi was throwing a literal party, having brought in the wives and concubines of his men, as well as prostitutes, musicians, and actors to alleviate the boredom of his troops and to demoralize his opponents. Of course, the Toyotomi forces were not just partying day and night. At one point, a group of siege engineers from Kai managed to tunnel under Odawara, forcing a part of the outer wall to collapse. Taking advantage of the breach, Inamasa attacked the castle, but a staunch defense put up by the Hojo soldiers forced him to retreat. One day, the defenders of Odawara awoke to see a massive stone castle at the top of Ishigaki-yama that had seemingly appeared overnight. It sort of had. Hideyoshi's men had been constructing the castle these past 80 days, using a heavily forested area as a screen to hide their labor. When they were done, they chopped down the trees, revealing the castle. Thus, Hideyoshi created the illusion that the castle materialized overnight. Whether they believed the trick or rationalized Ishigaki-yama Castle's existence, its construction was the final nail in the coffin of the Odawara defenders' morale. A few days later, the last hope the Hojo might have still died when Date Masamune arrived with his army and joined the Toyotomi cause, even apologizing to Hideyoshi for being late during their personal meeting. With all other castles except Oshi having been captured and their last ally throwing their lot in with the enemy, the Hojo realized they couldn't win and offered their surrender. Perhaps they believed they would be permitted to rule over their lands, as the Shimazu in Kyushu. They were wrong. Ujimasa and his brother Ujiteru were forced to commit seppuku. Ujimasa's son and heir, Ujinao, was spared this fate on account of being Ieyasu's son-in-law, but both he and his wife were exiled to Mount Koya, where he died of smallpox a year later. The Kanto region had been ruled for almost a century by the later Hojo, but no more. Hideyoshi stripped them of their lands, though in time, Ujinori would be given Sayama province due to his good relationship with Tokugawa Ieyasu, and his family would hold that land until the Meiji Restoration over 200 years later. Kanto, the most fertile plain in all of Japan, went to Tokugawa Ieyasu. In hindsight, it wasn't a good move on Hideyoshi's part, since he was awarding the wealthiest region of the land to his biggest rival, effectively sending him on the path to becoming shogun. In return, Ieyasu gave up his ancestral land in Mikawa and those provinces he had conquered throughout his lifetime, including Totomi, Suruga, Shinano and Kai. Still, his income skyrocketed to roughly 2.5 million koku, making him wealthier than Hideyoshi himself. Of course, Hideyoshi knew the economic value of Kanto, hence his decision to give it to Ieyasu was most likely done in order to move him further away from the political center of Kyoto and to establish a powerful and dependable ally in the east to prevent any uprisings while Hideyoshi was busy invading Korea. In addition, Ieyasu would no longer be able to rely on Mikawa's battle-hardened and loyal samurai. Instead, he would have to earn the allegiance of the samurai he had just beaten. Perhaps Hideyoshi was gambling on the Kanto Bushi not fully dedicating themselves to their new daimyo. If he did, he was wrong. Yet the former Hojo lands were not the only ones to change hands. Hideyoshi had issued orders to the daimyo from northeast Honshu, including Date Masamune. These lords either neglected their orders completely, or like Masamune, came to Toyotomi's assistance too late. Thus, the Kampaku punished them accordingly by rearranging their land holdings. Setting up his new headquarters at Utsunomiya, he began accepting the daimyo who peacefully recognized his hegemony. At the same time, his army toured Oshu under Masamune's guidance and pacified the stubborn warlords by the sword. Despite providing Hideyoshi with his assistance, the Date daimyo was not exempt from this punishment, with his 1.1 million koku domain shrinking down to around 700,000. As expected, the redistribution of land left many lords displeased, and as soon as Hideyoshi's forces moved out of Tohoku, rebellions began sprouting. Former retainers of the Kasai and Osaki clans in central Mutsu rose up in Isawa County, demanding the rule of the land be returned to the Date. They were joined by thousands of peasants who were disappointed by the treatment of their new liege lord, Kimura Yoshikiyo, and the heavy taxation he imposed. At the same time, Waga Yoshitada and Hieinuki Hirutada revolted in Waga and Hieinuki counties respectively. The rebels, some suspected to be supported by Masamune himself, enjoyed some initial success in capturing Futago Castle in October, the seat of the Wafa clan. Later in the winter, they followed up their success by capturing Toriyagaseki Castle because of Nanbu Nobunao's inability to relieve the siege due to the snowy weather. This was only the start of Nobunao's problems. The new year brought a new insurrection in March. Konohei Masazane, who disputed Nobunao's succession to the head of the Nanbu clan, rose against him with around 5,000 experienced warriors at his back. He then began attacking Sanahei's surrounding castles. It wasn't long before news of the insurrections reached Hideyoshi's ears. While the same harsh winter conditions that hindered Nobunao's actions would also prevent him from intervening, the situation would change in spring. Determined to bring peace across the land, Hideyoshi sent 30,000 men, led by Toyotomi Hidetsugu and Tokugawa Ieyasu, to re-punish Oshu for its insubordination. This would be the Kampaku's final war fought on Japanese soil. They were joined by other great names of their time: Uesugi Kageketsu, Otani Yoshitsugu, Maeda Toshie, Ishida Mitsunari, and Date Masamune, who helped to put down the very rebels who wanted him as their ruler in an effort to clear the suspicion around his name. At the same time, another 60,000-man strong division that local troops had reinforced was pressing hard to suppress Masazane's revolt. On the 2nd of September, they laid siege to Konohei Castle after capturing the outlying forts. The fortress was protected by rivers on 3 sides and a cliff on the other, making it a natural stronghold. Despite enjoying this strong position, Masazane realized he was vastly outnumbered and sued for peace on the condition that the lives of those inside be spared. The castle was formally surrendered 2 days later. but the attackers went back on their promise, killing everyone inside, while Masazane and other leaders of the rebellion were transferred to Misako and executed. The end of the Konohei Rebellion also brought the end of Hideyoshi's war in Japan. After almost a decade, he had finally pacified and united the land, fulfilling his predecessor's ambition. However, while victorious in the field, Hideyoshi would experience tragedy at home. The summer of 1591 was a black month for the Kampaku, as his 3-year-old son, Tsurumetsu, died. His brother Hidenaga soon followed. Fearing a possible succession crisis that could plunge the Toyotomi clan into jeopardy, Hideyoshi adopted his nephew Hidetsugu and proclaimed him as his heir in the first month of the following year. Hideyoshi also appointed him as Kampaku, while he himself retired with the title of Taiko, or Retired Regent. As Taiko, he could escape from the everyday duties he had to face while holding the office of the Imperial Regent, while still wielding significant power and remaining the military authority of the land. He also served as Hidetsugu's shield, preventing any thoughts of rebellion against the young Kampaku. That same year, Hideyoshi would embark on his first overseas adventure, launching the first invasion of Korea and starting the Imjin War, which we have already covered, and you can watch in great detail in our past videos. However, the appointment of Hidetsugu as Kampaku did not really provide the smooth transition and stabilization Hideyoshi had hoped for. Instead, it created a power dipole, with the two factions clashing frequently. In 1593, Hideyoshi's second wife, Yododono, provided him with another natural son, Hideyori. Hideyori's birth created even more tensions within the Toyotomi camp, as Hideyoshi now had a natural son to promote as heir. History may not repeat, but it does rhyme, and the Toyotomi succession issue began to look very much like the crisis that sparked the Onin War, which led to the downfall of the Ashikaga. 2 years later, Hideyoshi was becoming increasingly more paranoid regarding his power, which led him to strip Hidetsugu of his titles, exile him to Mount Koya, and order him to commit seppuku. Hidetsugu complied with the Taiko's request. It was another grave mistake on Hideyoshi's part. 3 years later, and while his Korean campaign had taken a turn towards the horrible, Hideyoshi's health began deteriorating rapidly. Sensing his end was fast approaching, and his 5-year-old son would have no male relative to protect him and handle power until Hideyori came of age, Hideyoshi formed the Gotairo. The Council of the Five Elders was made up of 5 of the most powerful daimyo in the land, designed to prevent one rising above the others. These were Tokugawa Ieyasu, Maeda Toshie, Ukita Hideiie, Usugi Kegeketsu, and Mori Terremoto. They swore to handle political affairs, to protect and guide Hideyori, and ensure his succession. On the 18th of September 1598, at Fushimi Castle, the Taiko drew his last breath. He had risen from humble peasant origins to become the most powerful man in Japan. With his death, he would claim an even greater honor and become a god, leaving behind an everlasting legacy as the second unifier of Japan. But for now, the way was open for Ieyasu to pursue his own ambitions and become shogun. Our series on the history of the Sengoku Jidai will soon continue, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.